Fit he began to babble with a disciple who was seated beside him about how it upsets him enough that a brat from the Manhwa sect was given admittance into the EUNHA Merchant Guild, but his name just had to be the same as that moron's. He went on to say that he didn't understand why his name had to be the same. It was actually the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, which is just another name for Chungmyeon. The disciples sitting next to Moksoyoung then questioned him whether he was talking about the Plum Blossom Saint. Isongbak, a member of the Southern Edge sect and a disciple of the second class, was the name of the disciple. However, upon hearing the query, Moksoyoung slammed his fist on the table and stated that the imbecile in question was not even worthy of a title as prestigious as the one he had. Songbik then let out an air to calm himself down from his fury. He wondered why the elder would constantly get so upset whenever the Mount Hua sect was brought up in conversation, even though the Plum Blossom Sword Saint had been dead for close to a century. At this point, people continued to talk about him. Songbik was curious as to what made that man seem so appealing. After that, he gave Maximum the assurance that he should not worry too much. Moksoyoung, on the other hand, did not show any signs of calming down and instead stated that the brat was spreading rumors that he would heal Elder Huang, so how could he not be upset by it? After that, Songbak questioned his senior about whether or not he believed Chungmyeon was capable of actually achieving that goal. Moksoyoung surprised him by telling him that Elder Huang's conditions seemed to be getting better, which is the opposite of the response he was expecting. After that, Songbik arrived at the conclusion that this must be the explanation. Elder Huang adheres to a stringent policy regarding the repayment of his debts, therefore the Union Merchant Guild will not put the Manhwa sect in a difficult situation if that youngster was successful in curing him. When Isongbak gave this some thought, he came to the realization that Elder Huang would do everything in his power to protect the Manhwa sect in the event that something like this ever occurred. Therefore he makes up his mind and tells himself that he will prevent that child from doing it no matter what. When Songbik presented Moksoyoung with his plan, he told that if he did not like the thought of the child being there, all they needed to do was chase him away. Songbik's suggestion was accepted. If the elder does it himself, it will be problematic. However, if the second-class disciples do it, there will be no cause for concern. This is because there is nothing improper about a second-class disciple of the Southern Edge sect engaging in a light sword duel with a third-class disciple of the Manhwa sect. After giving what Songbik said a lot of thought, Moksoyoung responded by saying that if they did that, people would start spreading rumors that they were trying to intimidate a child. Songbik, however, disproved this and said that there is no one who is unaware of the continuous competition between the Manhwa sect and the Southern Edge sect. Therefore, if they state that they happened to run into each other by coincidence and decided to fight, there won't be any problems, and the fact that the Manhwa and Southern Edge conference is coming up soon will serve as a good explanation. After that, Moksoyoung stated that he understands what Songbik's point, but he still won't allow it. He explained that he won't allow it because the youngster that Songbik will be facing was merely still a third-class disciple, and using violence against a child does not fit the status of the Southern Edge sect. However, even after Moksoyoung said that, Songbik simply smirked, took his sword and declared that he would take what Moksoyoung said, which was that he did not let it happen. Songbik's statement was followed by Songbik brandishing his sword. Isongbak got to his feet, bowed his head before Moksoyoung, and then continued by saying that if one of Mokseung's pupils were to mess up, all they would have to do is take responsibility. Therefore, if they state that they happened to run into each other by coincidence and decided to fight, there won't be any problems, and the fact that the Manhwa and Southern Edge conference is coming up soon will serve as a good explanation. After that, Moksoyoung stated that he understands what Songbik's point, but he still won't allow it. He explained that he won't allow it because the youngster that Songbik will be facing was merely still a third-class disciple, and using violence against a child does not fit the status of the Southern Edge sect. However, even after Moksoyoung said that, Songbik simply smirked, took his sword and declared that he would take what Moksoyoung said, which was that he did not let it happen. Songbik's statement was followed by Songbik brandishing his sword. Isongbak got to his feet, bowed his head before Moksoyoung, and then continued by saying that if one of Mokseung's pupils were to mess up, all they would have to do is take responsibility for their conduct. Moksoyoung expressed his agreement and stated that he would discipline anyone who touched the child without his permission. Songbak, on the other hand, was fully aware of what his elder was referring to. He was aware that along with that punishment came an even more significant prize, hence he could not help but smile. After Songbik left, Moksoyoung was left to reflect on himself. After being left alone, that Songbik was staring down on the Manhwa sect was something that, in his opinion, did not come as a surprise to him at all. When he was younger, the Southern Edge sect did not even have a chance against the Manhwa sect. This is because by the time he was born, it was already in a state of collapse. Even now, the Southern Edge sect would still be lower than the Manhwa sect. If the demon Sec Tasso hadn't brought them down because of this, Moksoyang believed that it was his responsibility to ensure that such times would never occur again. Moksoyang persisted in his line of reasoning and came to the conclusion that given the fact that the child in question had traveled all the way there from the Mount Hua sect, it was probably safe to conclude that they had restarted their efforts to expand their influence and that you believed that he had trodden on them sufficiently to prevent them from being able to stand back up. Because of this, the glass that was on his hand had only barely survived the force that Moksoyang was applying to it and was on the verge of breaking. Moksoyang then had the thought that he would discuss this matter with the head of the sect as soon as this event was resolved. Songbik and the other disciple who was going with him were on the other hand outside and traveling in the direction. Chungmyung was one of the Southern Edge sect. Disciples approached him and inquired about what would happen to the child. Songbik responded by suggesting that they should try to persuade the child to return, although the concept of persecuting a youngster did not sit well with him. He reasoned that the situation would appear even more serious if one of the more experienced members of the group carried it out as the two of them continued to walk and converse. At the same time, Goi pondered what on earth the Mount Hua sect was thinking when they sent such a young child there by themselves. If the youngster had been a member of their sect, sending them there alone would not have been permitted. Songbik explained to Wiggle that the conditions of each sect are unique and that each must have had their own motives for doing what they did. Then Goi recalled that the circumstances of the Mount Hua sect aren't all that wonderful. But Songbik merely shrugged it off and remarked that they only need to carry out their mission first. He advised them to keep in mind that assisting their senior is their top concern. Goi then felt perplexed as a result of Songbik's unexpected stop. After then, Songbik gave a smirk and stated that it was no longer necessary to look for the child in question. Both of them were able to make out the child they have been searching for. Chungmyung, who is unaware of the two people's existence, was simply attending to his business. It was at that time that the two people greet him. Chungmyung turned his head to gaze at Songbik, who was formally greeting him by stating that he was pleased to see a disciple from the Mount Hua sect. But Chungmyung on the other hand didn't do much more than give a half-hearted bow and a hello, which made the mood unpleasant. Songbik then tried to strike up a discussion by inquiring as to where Chungmyung was going right now. Chungmyung didn't think twice before announcing that he was going to check on Elder Huang's health at the location where he was staying. As Songbik glanced at Chungmyung, he formed the opinion that he had a thick layer of skin. He was sure that there was no way a child like him could cure Elder Huang's disease. When even elders and important physicians just shrugged their shoulders, and now that he watched the youngster talk as if he could accomplish it, he thought that this child was clearly not all that good-natured. Songbik put on an act of smiling and asked Chungmyung for a few minutes of his time, to which Chungmyung graciously consented. He told Chungmyung in a nice way that he may have already known that the Southern Edge sect and the Mount Hua sect had developed through sword fighting with each other. Since ancient times, this was something that he said the Southern Edge sect in the Mount Hua sect had done even in modern times. There is a gathering known as the Southern Edge in Mount Hua sect conference, at which adherents of the two schools engage in combat with one another. However, in his response, Chungmyung stated that he was unaware of that because he had only recently joined the cult, and it had not been very long since he had done. So Songbik mumbled something after that, indicating that this was what he had been considering because he wouldn't be acting so superior to him right now. If he had seen the Southern Edge sect in Mount Hua sect conference, after that he relayed to Chungmyung that gaining exposure to the swordsmanship of the Mount Hua sect would be of tremendous assistance to his own training. He was inquiring about Chungmyung's availability to engage in combat with him. Songbik grinned and thought to himself that Chungmyung would turn him down because he had such high expectations for himself. However, contrary to his expectations, Chungmyung asked Songbik if he was indicating that he wanted to fight. Chungmyung was disgustingly disgruntled and asked Songbik this question. Songbik was taken aback by Chungmyung's attitude toward him, and it took him off guard. Songbik on the other hand asserted that it was not a battle but rather training in which the two participants exchanged various sword styles. However, Chungmyung did not trust him when Songbik responded that it was not a fight. Chungmyung questioned him further by asking then what is it. In addition to that, he instructed him to stop beating around the bush. But Chungmyung simply ignored it because he relishes engaging in physical conflict at any time. Chungmyung continued to tell Songbik not to repent, despite the fact that the latter's expression became even more befuddled. Both Chungmyung and Songbik stood apart from one another, facing one another in the distance while the wind blew. Songbik then inquired about Chungmyung's monastic name, to which Chungmyung replied that he does not actually have one, but that his name is Chungmyung. Songbik continued to press for an answer. Songbik informed him that he would refer to him as such. If it turned out to be the case, he instructed Chungmyung to pay attention to him and promised that he would offer him some guidance despite the fact That Chungmyung is still a youngster. He explained to Chungmyung that although he could believe he was not doing anything wrong at the moment, the state of world affairs is not necessarily decided by whether or not a person is acting inappropriately. Chungmyung on the other hand merely glanced at him without showing any sign of curiosity. Songbik persisted in giving him advice, telling him that he need to go back to the Manhwa sect before he ran into any more significant difficulties. Songbik was taken aback when Chungmyung inquired as to whether or not he planned to engage in combat prior to the conclusion of ISO and GBEK's speech. After that, Chungmyung remarked that he had a feeling that members of the Southern Edge sect would rather use words than swords. This infuriated Goi, who responded by raising his hand in anger. However, Songbik was able to halt him while keeping his own anger under control. Songbik gripped his sword tightly and thought to himself that he was not yet psychologically disciplined enough since he couldn't help but want to beat the pulp out of that Brett. Song was thinking this as he clutched his sword. Songbik tightened his grip on his jaw in rage as he considered the possibility that there was no longer any justification for him to hold back. Once more, Songbik positioned his hands in front of him and made an official challenge to Chungmyung to engage in a fight. However, in spite of all of that excitement, Chungmyung instructed him to wait. Consequently, Songbik became irritated and asked him what the issue was this time around. Chungmyung responded by saying that he was not talking to him but rather to the person standing behind Songbik. He then asked Goi to lend him his sword, which left the two individuals absolutely dumbfounded. Goi pondered whether or not that was an appropriate statement for a follower of a well-known sect to make. The first thing that members of the swordsmanship sects are taught is to never allow anyone to lay their hands on their swords. Chungmyung asked him to borrow his weapon, and he cannot believe that Chungmyung would do such a thing. Since Goi asked Chungmyung how he could not carry a sword since he was a follower of a swordsmanship sect, Chungmyung responded by saying that he never thought that he would have to fight in such a manner. Goi was confused by Chungmyung's response. Goi's anger was further fueled by the fact that Chungmyung turned around and told him that it was fine if he couldn't give it to him, he'd just pick up anything else that he could use as a sword instead. Songbik on the other hand ordered Goi to lend Chungmyung his sword, but Goi is opposed to the idea. However, after Songbik threatened that if he did not lend it and people found out, the world would find out that they threatened a child from the Manhwa sect to fight, who did not even have a sword, Goi could not say anything back to Songbik. He then summoned Chungmyung and thrust the sword in the direction of Chungmyung. But Chungmyung was quick enough to catch it as Chungmyung said, "Shall we begin now?" Songbik questioned Chungmyung about why he had not yet removed the sword from its sheath despite the fact that Chungmyung had not yet unsheathed it. Chungmyung provided a response stating that it was not like they were trying to kill each other, and as a result he does not see the need for it. However, Chungmyung had by his Songbik that he is free to draw his sword at any time if he so chooses. Songbik kept this side to calm himself down, and reflected that when he talked to Chungmyung, he got the impression that all of his mental development up until this point had been for nothing. First, Songbik contended to frighten him away by frightening him a little bit, but now he thought that Chungmyung would not listen to his words without a little lesson, and by lesson he meant the battle. Songbik's original goal was to scare him away by terrifying him a little bit. Songbik's fury flared up and he told Chungmyung that he should make sure to keep his guard up at all times. He explained to Chungmyung that by the time he recognized that he was not exhibiting any mercy to him, it would be too late for him to make a change in the situation. Chungmyung, who was becoming increasingly irritated by the incessant babbling, suggested that they move quickly, because they do not have the whole day. Altered his stance and prepared to engage in combat. He moved forward with a single step, then leaped toward Chungmyung and struck with his sword while it was still drawn. Nevertheless, Chungmyung was able to successfully stop it after the first blow. Songbik readied his sword for another strike and struck Chungmyung again, which caught Chungmyung again. But this time he was able to stop it. Goi was standing outside of the arena when he got the impression that Songbik was probably feeling extremely upset, and that he did not want the battle to stop right now. Goi on the other hand and simply shrugged it off and stated that it was the child's fault from the beginning, because he had gotten on Songbik's nerves. After that, he was of the opinion that Chungmyung had selected the incorrect individual to carry out the task. It might have appeared as though he was holding off Songbik, but in reality it was probably taking everything he had just to stay upright in the face of Songbik's assault. He believed that Songbik was holding back because if he finished the combat too quickly, people might complain that they needlessly mistreated a tiny child. He assumed that Songbik was holding back. Because of this possibility, Goi was certain that Songbik was just using enough power on Chungmyung to just barely defend himself against Songbik's assaults. In other words, he was instructing the child without so much as striking him once during the entire process. He simply prays that Song Baek does not become overly worked up about the situation. However, after trading a couple more hits with one another, Song Baek struck Chung Myung once more, but this time he was aware that Chung Myung had deflected his blow despite the fact that he was using such a substantial sword. After giving it some thought, Song Baek realized that his opponent had blocked even his first attack earlier, as if he had anticipated the path that his sword would take Song, because a strong suspicion that Chung Myung was following the route of his blade, and he questioned whether or not Chung Myung could do that without also reading his mind, even if he exaggerates his age. He appears to be no more than 15 years old, hence he would be approximately the same age as Iso and Baek's younger brother. Assuming that Songbak has a sibling of that age, as Songbak makes his way once more towards Chung Myung, he has a hard time believing that a child of that age could be capable of doing something like the such. While Chung Myung readied his sword to make another defense, Songbak readied himself to make another attack. Chung Myung moved his right foot to the back of his left foot and held the sword in his hand diagonally. Just as Songbak's blade was about to hit Chung Myung, this caused Songbak's stroke to be deflected once more. After some time, Song Baek came to the conclusion that Chung Myung was successfully avoiding each and every one of his blows. Chung Myung made a backward leap to create distance between them. While Songbak was lost in a trance looking at Chung Myung, Songbak was confused, since his swordsmanship was believed to be among the greatest in the Southern Edge sect. But he could not understand how Chung Myung was blocking his blows. Songbak clenched his teeth in frustration as he let Kai pour into the hand that was clutching the blade. He encircled the sword with his Kai, thinking only of one thing: it was impossible for Chung Myung to evade his assaults. And he just could not accept that fact. He encircled the blade with his Kai. After that, he looked across at Chung Myung, who appeared to be terrified by what had just taken place, and just as he was going to strike the Chung Myung envelope with Kai, Goe yelled at Songbak to stop what he was doing and told him to stop. This prompted Song Baek to focus his attention on himself and swiftly pull his Kai back. In the meantime, Chung Myung did nothing but stand there and wait for the attack to take place. However, the attack did not take place because Songbak stopped it before it struck him. When Songbak was ready to breathe a sigh of relief when he thought that he would finally be able to stop before he went all out to Chung Myung, Chung Myung abruptly soared away, looking as if Songbak's strike had heard when in fact it had not. The rear of Chung Myung landed right in front of the entrance to the Union Merchant Guild. Both Songbak and Goe were taken aback. When Chung Myung spewed blood, Chung Myung immediately fell to the ground following the incident, which caused the blood that was dripping from his mouth to spread across the ground. He is extremely perplexed. Songbak was sure that his most recent strike had not hit Chung Myung anyway, and he cannot understand how this could have happened. After that, Songbak was mute for a little period of time until Goe called him, at which point he was brought back to the present. Goe was rushing toward Chung Myung, who was lying on the ground, and screamed at Songbak about what he had done to the young boy. Songbak made an effort to speak, but the words wouldn't just come out. He was too shocked by what was happening to be able to say anything at that moment. At that point, Goe had already grasped Chung Myung in his arms, and Songbak could only stand there and watch from a distance, unsure of what action to take next. During the time that Songbak was able to get a distant view of Chung Myung's face, he was able to confirm to himself that he had removed his Kai from the blade. In spite of this, he was not even able to scratch him when he was attacking him with all of his strength before. As a result, he is left wondering how it was even possible for him to fly backward like that when his sword hit him. After Songbak had removed his Kai from the blade at that very moment, Chung Myung, who was at that point being held by Goe, let forth another cough, a fountain of blood. When Goe saw this, he was beyond shocked, and he was afraid, so in a panic, he asked Songbak what they should do about the situation. Songbak, on the other hand, did not respond to him. Instead, he just stood there with a blank face, amazed at the fact that blood could flow like that from a person's mouth. He had never seen anything like that before. By that time, Songbak's expression had entirely changed, as he had realized that, no matter how other people interpreted the situation, he was in the wrong. Songbak began to perspire merely from hearing Jonggui's voice when he finally arrived just in time at the scene. Jonggui was approaching. Goe was clutching Chung Myung, who was bleeding like a fountain. Goe also noticed Jo and Gui's approach. They were able to see that Jonggui was exceedingly upset, which made Goe look pale. Chung Myung was then examined by a doctor who performed the examination right there and stated that Chung Myung's health is pretty critical. The doctor also stated that Chung Myung's inside organs are a mess and that he has to be treated right away. While all of them were rushing to get out of there and treat Chung Myung, Jonggui, Songbak and Goe merely stood there in the backdrop where Chung Myung's pool of blood was. Songbak appeared concerned and was incapable of uttering a word. All he could do was ask himself if there was a justification for what he had done. Even Zhuge Liang's grandfather was unable to offer a satisfactory explanation for what had taken place at this location. After that, Zhong readdressed them in a solemn manner and questioned how they could call themselves a prominent sect, after employing such a harmful method on a youngster. When Zhonghui added that he thought the Southern Edge sect was on the correct path, he gave off an air of bewilderment and remorse as Zhonghui moved closer to the pool of blood that Chengmyang had spilled. He was able to see his furious reflection in the blood. He inquired of them how he might handle the scenario that had just taken place right in front of his eyes. After giving Songbak the cold shoulder, Zhonghui glared at Songbak with a furious expression on his face and vowed that he would never forget what had occurred earlier that day. The next thing he did was ask Songbak to leave their place as soon as possible, which took Songbak's surprise. Moksoyang's voice made Songbak jump when he heard it behind him, inquiring about what was happening on there. Songbak recognized it as being his elder. After that, Moksoyang questioned Zhong Yui about what was taking place, at which point Zhonghui pointed out a pool of blood on the ground. After that, there was a return to the previous level of silence. Moksoyang quickly became aware of what had transpired at that location. Moksoyang cast a furious glance in Songbaek's direction while thinking angrily about what an idiot he is. Right away, he made an attempt to make things better by suggesting that there must have been some sort of accident. Zhonghui, on the other hand, did not buy it and questioned how they could claim that it was merely an accident because the disciple from their Southern Edge sect came dangerously close to killing the boy who was tending to his father. Zhonghui questioned the other members of their group about how they could simply dismiss what happened as an accident. As each of the lines increases on Jongui's face became more apparent, he became even more enraged. He then whispered that an accident is something that occurs via no one's deliberate action. After that, Songbak made a hasty attempt to justify himself by claiming that everything was just a misunderstanding, that he never used too much force and that the fight was nothing more than a normal duel. But of course Zhonghui did not let that pass and claimed that was not the issue. There he then asked him why he would ever lift their sword against a disciple from the Mount Hua sect in the first place. But Songbak was unable to say anything in response to Jongui's question. After that, Zhonghui talked about the sword duel. He stated that despite the fact that he was not very familiar with how things work in the Kangho, he did remember hearing that sword duels make sense only when they are between people of rivaling strength. This is the reason why Zhonghui was so angry, because they fought Chengmyang, who was just a child who had barely lived half of Songbaek's age. After that, Zhonghui asked Songbak, "Is that how it is in the Southern Edge sect?" These were the words that struck a chord in Songbaek's heart. After that, Zhonghui informed them that he had nothing else to say to them, and he instructed Moksoyang to take his student and depart from their location as soon as possible. Moksoyang was unable to do much more than look at Zhonghui with a discontented expression, because Zhonghui was functioning as the master of the Yuna Merchant Guild at the time. Moksoyang then told Zhonghui the final things that he had to say. He said that he would do what Zhonghui instructed, but he also said that the Southern Edge sect earnestly wished for Elder Huang's full recovery. Despite what had occurred there, however, Zhonghui just walked away and claimed that he would retain what Moksoyang said in his mind. He continued as he passed by Moksoyang that he would keep that in mind, despite the fact that his tone of voice suggested that this was not the case at all. Boxing had no choice but to maintain his silence. After that, Moksoyang announced to Songbak that he would be going back to their place with Goi without him, which both shocked and perplexed Songbak. He delivered the message to Songbak with a chilly demeanor that whoever was to blame for that situation must accept full responsibility for it before going back to their temple. Moksoyang instructed Songbak to remain there and do whatever it takes in order to gain the forgiveness of Zhonghui. Because of this, Songbaek's face became more serious and he clenched his teeth in preparation to comply with his senior. Chengmyang was found unconscious and lying down inside the mansion of the Yuna Merchant Guild, while someone was telling Zhongyui that Chengmyang's health was critical because his Kai had been fully depleted. The man continued by saying that the doctor had also mentioned that even though they had treated Chengmyang, it was not possible to ensure that she would make a full recovery. After that, Zhonghui questioned whether Chengmyang's life was no longer in danger, to which the man replied that he would presume that to be the case. After that, Zhonghui mumbled something about relief if that was indeed the case. The man said that it will take at least 2 or 3 days for Chengmyang to regain consciousness. In response to Jongui's question about whether or not the doctor had said anything about when Chengmyang would regain consciousness, Zhonghui let out a sigh, looked at Chengmyang and expressed his desire that his father's condition would not deteriorate before the scheduled visit. This boy is the only one who was able to improve his father's condition, and he did so single-handedly. It's possible that he's the only person who can save his father. Zhonghui was perplexed as to why they would assault a youngster of such a young age and beat him till he was unconscious. Jongui's train of thought proceeded with the idea that if those people had even the slightest amount of respect for the Yuna Merchant Guild and his father, they never would have done something like that. Zhonghui tightened his grip on his fist as he contemplated the fact that the Southern Edge sect had become too naughty. The man then asked Zhonghui if he truly believes that Changmyang could save Elder Huang because he is unable to bring himself to trust Changmyang. At this time Songbak responded by saying that he does believe that Changmyang could save. Elder Huang was able to enumerate all the signs of his father's illness without even seeing him in person. Although Zhonghui responded that none of the numerous notable doctors they had brought were able to detect his father's disease. Lastly, his father's condition has shown significant signs of improvement. The other person didn't say anything. So Zhonghui continued by saying that his belief in Changmyang is not without foundation and that he interprets that as the heavens trying to assist him. After that, Zhonghui gave the man permission to do whatever it was he could think of to expedite Changmyang's recovery to the fullest extent feasible. Then in the middle of the night an unknown stranger wearing a hood broke into Changmyang's bedroom and looked at the unconscious body of Changmyang. After that he prepared a spell by raising his 2 index fingers while he was saying that it was payback for getting in his way. The man in the hood's 2 fingers emitted a color that was a mixture of red and black. The fingers of the masked man then attempted to attack Changmyang, but they were unsuccessful. The hooded man was shaken up by this, but he was much more shaken up when he saw Changmyang awake and staring at him straight on. Changmyang grinned and then he reached out and grabbed the attacker's arm, pulling it away from his neck.